Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at the MSI Geforce RTX 3050 Gaming X, a low-range graphics card with some high-end features. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at the MSI Gaming X RTX 3050. So this is kind of MSI's medium to high-end range. So the Gaming X range is generally towards the top of the tier. You've obviously got things like the Ventus, which are down in the lower stack. This is what you would consider a somewhat premium card. So today we're going to go through, do an unboxing, take a look at the packaging, see what the specs are all about, take a look at some gameplay results, look at where this fits actually in the product stack, see if it's actually worth the money they're charging for it at the moment, and then at the end of the video we'll sum up and then you can work out whether or not this is going to be suitable for your next gaming build. So starting off with the packaging, pretty nice retail packaging from MSI as you're used to seeing. So this is the Gaming X variant of the RTX 3050, and say Geforce RTX, RTX in massive letters. I think that's actually something that they have to do due to their contract with nvidia. I'm not entirely sure, but maybe it is. Lots of great features on here. So obviously this is built on the Ampere architecture, supports ray tracing, all that kind of good stuff. You've got obviously DLSS, all those kind of extra features that are built in now to the GeForce drivers, which will allow a graphics card such as this one, which is, to be honest with you, really designed for 1080p, kind of 60 frames per second minimum gaming, but will, with DLSS and other advantages built into the software, you can obviously scale it so you can get much better frames per second should you wish to in those AAA titles. This card essentially is aimed at 1080p gaming, and when we're doing our testing later on in the video, you'll see all the games are tested 1080p, and I've set them all to ultra wherever possible, so that'll give you a good idea of kind of like the maximum quality settings. Obviously, if you do want to enable things like DLSS or some sort of scaling, then you will get much better frames per second, albeit at a slight loss visually. On the back of the box, it goes into some of the features of why this is a slightly more expensive version of the 3050 than what you've possibly seen around. We've got the Twin Frozzer. This is Twin Frozzer 8, so this is the 8th generation of the Twin Frozzer setup. We've also got Torx Fan 4, so the fans on here, they are spectacular. I've got to be honest with you. The cooling system on this is possibly worth the extra on its own before you look at other things such as, you've got core pipes, so you've got, I think it's 5 heat pipes on here. I've tried to take it apart as best as I possibly could to see what is there. You're probably seeing it for some B-roll now. There are 3 heat pipes on one side, 2 on the other, and obviously they can't be U-pipes because otherwise one would stop somewhere. So it's either 3 or 5, I'm not entirely sure. But whatever it is, it does a fantastic job of keeping this thing super, super cool. In our testing today, as you'll see from the benchmark stuff later on, this thing's realistically, under normal gameplay, it's going to be hitting somewhere like 50 degrees Celsius in a somewhat 25 degrees Celsius room, so it's basically just plodding along. So lots of chances for overclocking there should you wish to. Also, it does have MSI Center support. So actually in MSI Center, you can go in and you can choose things like the AI Frozzer. You can turn that on or off. You've got GPU fan monitoring, and also you've got Mystic Light Sync. So if you want to, you can actually get the MSI logo, which is on the card, which is very discreet. You can get that to synchronize with the rest of your system if you're in the MSI ecosystem. Obviously, if you're in a different ecosystem, potentially you can get this to work with things like Signal RGB or Open RGB. But certainly for MSI fanboys out there, this works absolutely fantastic, as you've probably already seen from some of the B-roll. I've just run through some of the key features here. So 2nd generation ray tracing, 3rd gen tensor cores, PCI Express Gen 4. Now this is PCI Express Gen 4, but it is running on a ×8 slot. So for those who are running PCI Express Gen 3, potentially in gaming, you may find somewhere between 5 to 10% performance reduction. Ideally, you want to be pairing this with the PCI Express Gen 4 motherboard if at all possible, but yeah, obviously depending on what you've got. You may find you've got a slightly older system with PCI Express Gen 3, you want to upgrade, don't want to spend an absolute ton of money, like less than £500, this could fit the bill quite easily. Other things to note, so this is a 8GB graphics card, so using GDDR6 running at 14 gigabits per second. Also when it comes to display outputs, you've got 3 display ports and you've got 1 HDMI. The HDMI is going to support 2.1, so that's going to give you kind of 4K 120Hz variable refresh. With the display ports, that's going to support DisplayPort 1.4, so yeah, pretty much the same deal there. Technically this card can support up to 8K resolutions, but clearly depending on what you're going to be using it for, you may or may not get benefits out of that. 8K I would imagine really is going to be for things like movie playback, in which case obviously it's going to do a fantastic job for that. But for gaming, realistically, like I said, 1080p, 1440p is okay. 4K is probably going to be pushing it way past its limits. Okay, so before we get into the actual taking a look at the card, I should say this has been sent to us free of charge for review purposes. It will be being sent back after the review, so I'm in no way obliged to say anything positive or negative, just say exactly as I find. Thanks very much to MSI for sending it, do appreciate it a lot. And actually, this is something which I have been looking forward to seeing. Now, the RTX 3050 range has got somewhat negative press, due primarily to pricing. This came out roughly the same sort of time as the RX 6500 XT and was kind of positioned to be its kind of counterpart. Now clearly this is a significantly faster card in most respects, and the fact that it supports the hardware encoding and decoding in H.264, H.265, etc. You've got the NVENC encoder in here, so if you're into streaming or using OBS, video editing, that sort of stuff, this is going to be great. And obviously it's got twice the memory of the RTX 6500 XT. They were supposed to be similar prices. Now this, originally the Geforce RTX 3050, was destined to have a price point of somewhere in the region of like £250, which for a 50 series card does seem a little bit on the high side. Now that was nvidia's kind of suggested retail prices. Clearly AIB cards, they have got other features built in them, such as uprated fans, uprated cooling, RGB support, all that kind of stuff. So you are going to pay a slight premium for some models. This one at the moment retails somewhere in the region between £300 and £350, depending where you're shopping. I have seen it as low as £275 here in the UK, but it does seem like a somewhat sketchy site, although they seem to be advertising sketchy prices on a daily basis. So how sketchy they are, I'm not entirely sure. You make up your own mind. So let's think about this card first of all. So where does this actually fit in the kind of the product stack? So if you've got something older, maybe you're using something like a GTX 1070, a RX 580 or an RX 6500 XT, that is going to be slower than this. This is going to give you a little bit of a frame boost. Now it's not going to be a huge amount. The GTX 1070 still does pretty much pull its own weight and does a fantastic job. This card itself is somewhere in the region of the kind of 1660 Super, 1660 Ti kind of levels. Obviously, the benefit you've got of this is you do have the tensor cores, you do have RTX support. Now whether or not that is beneficial to you, that is down to the individual to decide. Clearly, those other cards are a little bit older now and actually quite difficult to get hold of. These are actually starting to come down in price across the board, so potentially this is going to be a really good choice. Now, if you're looking at other cards which are slightly up from this, then you're going to be looking at things like the RTX 2060, the 5600 XT, the 6600 XT, and the RX 6600. Now, those all do kind of trade blows with this in certain respects, and obviously depending on the game, if it's nvidia sponsored or AMD sponsored, you're going to see some differences there. But realistically, this is kind of 1660 Super, 1660 Ti kind of level. So that is where I would kind of put it, obviously add in the RTX support. So let's take a closer look at the card itself. So as you can see, the first thing you notice straight away are these Frozr fans. These are great. The Torx or Frozr system is excellent. MSI have done a really good job in terms of graphics card cooling over the last probably 10 years or so, I guess. And the card itself is actually very stylish. I really do like the look of this. It is actually really chunky and it's actually considerably larger than my 2060 Super, which is in the PC behind me. This runs significantly cooler and significantly quieter. So if you're looking for a very quiet graphics card, this ticks those boxes. Although the fans themselves, they can ramp up massively. So if you do want them to be running full blast, they will run much more powerfully, should you want to, again, in the MSI Center, or even take control of the fans through the software, all that kind of stuff. You can get, actually, there is like a boost mode. So you click on that and it actually makes the fans run, keeps the temperatures way, way down if it's just idling. That is the weird thing. This has got the zero fan technology, so if it doesn't need to be spinning, it won't do. Although weirdly, the temperatures do seem to spike. So when you first start gaming, this is going to be idling kind of like not far above ambient temperature of your case. When you first start your game, you'll see a very slight spike, and then when the fans kick in, you'll see it drop right down again, down to somewhere between sort of 45-50 degrees, obviously depending on your environment, case cooling, etc, etc. Like I said, the fans in normal use, silent. You wouldn't notice they're on at all. It's possibly actually one of the quieter things in my PC when it's actually running, so that is awesome. The heatsink itself, the whole thing is, I would say personally, is oversized for what it could be. You could probably chop that in half and actually still get pretty decent performance out of it. Something else which they've done, which is a nice addition, especially in a 50 range card, is we've got a really nice metal backplate. And the metal backplate is actually doing something in this particular instance. We see a lot of graphics cards now where they're just a metal backplate and it's just there for visuals purely. This one actually has some heat pads on the back and is actually attaching to the back of the memory and also the processor and the core, etc., to try and dissipate some more of that heat, and it does appear to do a particularly good job. Styling wise, I think they've dialed this in absolutely perfectly. MSI styling is something that you either like or you don't. I personally really like it. I like these kind of angular sections, lots of shapes and stuff going on. It's not a boring flat box or anything like that. It's got nice bits going on. The bit I like as well, the RGB, the MSI logo, the fact that you can have it lit up and obviously have it synchronized with the rest of your system is a really nice touch. Again, this is a 50 series card. It is supposed to be kind of entry level, but this has got the sort of premium features we'd have seen on a top end card only a few years ago. And talking of things that you don't normally see on a 50 series card is a 8-pin PCI Express connector. So this does require an 8-pin PCI Express connector, so gone are the days where you could get your 1050 and plug it in and take the motherboard power. This will need additional power, although it doesn't use a great deal. But this has got a rated TDP of somewhere in the region of about 130 watts. Obviously, if you want to, you can overclock it a little bit and it will draw more, but generally 130 watts is what you should be using or thereabouts. Also a nice feature, which you normally see on the higher end models, especially Founders Edition cards, is a pass-through. So the fan on the bottom is actually going to be passing air through the radiator and then exhausting it out through, which is good for cooling purposes, obviously. And like I've said numerous times already, it does do a really good job of keeping things cool. But yeah, nice backplate, that's all done really well. The whole thing just feels very, very premium, very solid. It is absolutely huge, to be honest with you. So I think we've talked enough about the card. What you really want to see is actually how well does it do. Now I haven't gone for the usual benchmarks, although there is one thrown in for good measure, which is Far Cry 6, which we'll be taking a quick look at now. So I actually did run the benchmark twice. So I did it once, first of all, 1080p, highest settings with RTX off, and then I turned RTX on and rerun it again. And surprisingly, didn't see a huge drop in performance, which actually surprised me quite a lot. Somewhere in the region of about 10 to 20 frames per second drop across the board, and still absolutely playable. 1080p, DXR on, it's going to be great. You're going to be playing that 60 frames per second, you can lock that in very easily, and of course, with things like Far Cry 6, you can use that sort of compression technology to make the scaler work better for you, so you can still lock in that and not drop below 60 frames per second should you wish to. Personally, I don't like using those types of things like DLSS and FXR, all that kind of stuff. I'd rather just have it natively, and if the frames drop, they drop, so be it. So Far Cry 6 runs absolutely amazingly. Let's take a look at something a little bit more taxing. Let's take a look at Cyberpunk 2077. So this actually runs really well. Again, 1080p, high settings. I've done the same sort of thing here. So I've done a couple of options with the RTX off, but everything else set to kind of normal 1080p high settings. And it runs very, very well indeed. And again, it looks very nice. Even with the reflections turned off, it still looks great. We've then increased it and then turned it on and set it to Psycho mode. And still, it is kind of playable. The frame rate does drop a little bit, as you can see, but it's actually still potentially playable, depending what your kind of level of bearability is. I actually find it to be okay. I'm probably not a biggest fan of ray tracing, so for me personally, I would probably leave it off. So Cyberpunk runs fine. I've got no real issues with it. It is what it is. It's one of those games where you don't really need those lightning responses anyway. Where you do need lightning responses though are driving games. So let's take a look at Wreckfest. Again, 1080p ultra settings. And this runs like an absolute dream, and it looks amazing, it really does. This is getting over 100 frames per second pretty much constantly, and we are seeing it go up as much as like 130s, 140s on this particular map. And as you can see from the gameplay, I actually don't do too bad. So let's take a closer look at that for a bit. So you can see it runs absolutely great. Now, obviously, if you want to run this at 1440p or potentially even 4K, if you're prepared to lower those settings a little bit, you could do very easily, or again, DLSS or scaling will come to your aid. Next up though, let's take a look at something a little bit more esportsy. Let's look at CSGO. So CSGO runs awesome pretty much on most things, but this looks great. Again, 1080p, we've got everything set to the maximum, all of the things running, shaders on max, etc. And we're getting anywhere between sort of 250 to 400 frames per second in different parts of the map, which is absolutely fine. So even the twitchiest of players should find this absolutely fine. Again, if you want to, up the resolution, lower the settings if you have to. Although realistically, you could play this probably at 4K and still get somewhere in the region of about 100 frames per second if you wanted to. Most people probably wouldn't. 1440p, high settings, you're still going to be getting excellent frame rates, at least in the 200s, so that is going to be absolutely fine. That you'd expect that from CSGO. So let's go back to some racing games now. So back to Rocket League game. If you want to play this competitively, this card can do it very easily. Excellent frame rates, again, 1080p, all the settings maxed out. Obviously motion blur is turned off. I should have said that earlier. Motion blur I turn off in pretty much all games because I think it just looks horrible and disgusting and smeary. So we leave that off. But yeah, Rocket League went very, very well. Played a level, or a round I should say, and we won. So yeah, that works for me. And this wouldn't be complete without some Fortnite. So let's take a look at Fortnite. Now this is running DirectX 12 beta. Also we've got RTX shadows turned on, and still it runs like an absolute dream. 1080p, everything pushed to the maximum, ultra settings. It looks great and it plays really nicely. My gameplay isn't brilliant, so let's take a quick look at that. So there you go, there's Fortnite, no problems at all. Again, you would expect it. This isn't a cheap card, and the whole 50 series thing is kind of taken a little bit of a knock. I'm not too sure what nvidia are going to do to put something in that kind of sub £200 bracket, or even sub £150 bracket. It does beg the question, what is the 3030 going to be like? Anyway, so there you go. That has been the MSI Gaming X RTX 3050. Not a cheap card. Definitely not what we expected from a 30 series range card, but we do have RTX on, should you wish to use it. It's a really difficult one for me to actually sum up. The card itself is just amazing. It's the engineering on it, the build quality is fantastic, and it really shouldn't be a 50 series card. It should be 60, potentially even a 70. If it wasn't for the fact of the actual speed, and if it wasn't for the PCI Express Gen 4 x8, then probably you could almost knock it up at another level. But I guess with the RTX 3060, some of the chips that didn't quite cut the mustard were transformed into an RTX 3050 with a few other features cut out to meet a certain price point. Now clearly, if you want to, if you just want to save money, but you do want a RTX 3050 style card, you can save money. Go with the Ventus version of this from MSI and you'll save yourself about £50. But with that, the Ventus cards, a little bit cheaper, you get slightly noisier fans, all that kind of stuff, and it's not quite such a premium product. Whereas with this, the Gaming X is a fantastic looking card, there's no doubt about that, well at least in my mind anyway. I think they've done a really good job on this. Whether or not it's worth the money, currently at around about sort of the £290 mark, I still feel it's a little bit much for an RTX 3050. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Some retailers are still selling for sort of $350 or more, which I think personally is way too much for what it is. But again, the market is a very, very weird place at the moment. And also coming up very shortly, we've got the RTX 4000 series coming out. So with that, there's likely to be price reductions. And hopefully, if we can see this coming on the market for somewhere in the region between maybe 225 and 250, I think that is the ideal positioning for it. Even though it's a quality card, we all want more for less money, don't we? That is what it's all about. But yeah, let me know what you think about this one in the comments section. I think that's going to wrap this one up. This has been the MSI Geforce RTX 3050 Gaming X. I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To. And hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.